the government to make an introduction, and then I hope that we'll have a constructive discussion. Thank you. Good morning, dear journalist. I'm Katerina Laskova. I'm the moderator of this discussion. This is our second meeting around the reforms in media in this Ukrainian media center. 2 weeks ago, we spoke about the reforms during the war, how important it is, and there is a demand for them, and what Ukrainian economy can face when everything is done, and how we will live. And there was the issue of tax changes and tax reform. That was the most important issue for the audience, and I'm happy that we got together and we can speak in details, and we presented the concept, the government presented the concept of the tax reform, and it's very important that the participation in this discussion. We have Fudashkin here. He's the Deputy Minister for Finances, so we can cover this concept from all the sides, and the government will answer questions, and we'll find out about their plans and details. And I suggest to participants, because we don't have a lot of time, not to speak about general issues, because I hope that I'm sure everyone who's here know well the concept, and the topic well. So that's why we can skip that, and we can come to the discussion and to details, because that's where the devil is, in details. That's why we'll speak about concrete issues. But the first introduction for 3 minutes, Denis Fudashkin will do that, and he will outline government plans, difficulties, thoughts about the concept, and what will happen to it, and when, how soon it will become a draft law, or how soon it will be used. I will start not with the concept, but with circumstances we have in the field of public finances, and what kind of limits that we have, because and why do we do this way? If we speak about taxes, we have to mention that the taxes is not a goal, the only goal of the state, and this is a tool with the help of which the state meets those responsibilities it took from the society, and we have quite big expenditures of public finances, and having the fiscal revenue on the level of 44% of GDP, and nevertheless we have a deficit in the public sector of the economy on the level of 5% of GDP. So once again, I would like to draw your attention to that. The taxes is not just the only goal, the prime goal of the state, but this is the means to fulfill the tasks of the state. If we look at the structure of these expenditures, then first of all, the big part of it is in the state, in the public sector, in the public state budget from 37% of GDP, 22.6%. Those expenditures for healthcare, education, and welfare. It's in addition to the pension fund, what they make, and that is on the level of 12% of GDP. That's why changes, reforms which are suggested, they are gradual, because at the same time, simultaneously, we cannot work on the issue of the reduction of taxes, or we cannot cancel some taxes if we don't solve the issue of how we will finance expenditures, public expenditures, and how we cover those commitments to the society the government has. That's why the government, we suggested to the government to have gradual changes, gradual reforms. And if we look back and look at proposals which were approved and supported by the parliament, and then the change of tax code, what amendments were suggested by the government, and that was about higher revenues in the cost of taxes, and the government believes that they can raise more those taxes, and this is the payment for natural resources and excised products, where it is not a big influence on economy of enterprises, and this is where there is under evaluation of what it can give to the state budget, especially from the natural resources. On the second stage of the second wave of draft legislation, and it was suggested to raise the payment for gas, mining gas, and also for oil, and that was suggested by the government, and that allows to reduce the state deficit. Those are the biggest like revenues. As to further steps, the government suggested to the society to discuss a reduction of a number of taxes. At present, in the tax code, we have 22 taxes, and they suggested to reduce them down to 9. The ways how to reduce them, there are two approaches. One, part of the taxes are just reduced, and some of them are unified, because some taxes they have their own place in the tax system, and but they coincide with they overlap other taxes. For example, environmental tax for oil products, and so the object and the base of taxation coincides with excise revenues, excise fees. The first registration of vehicles, it overlaps with excise fee for vehicles. Does it make sense to have the two taxes and where they overlap? It's not logic, and it is suggested to unify them and to bring them together, and under excise taxes. I think that you know these proposals about the reduction of the number of taxes, and what taxes are suggested to cut. What's after that? What will be after that? Next steps we suggest. In the very near future, we'll publish the draft law, and we'll bring to the discussion for all stakeholders to have the text of these proposals, and for them to suggest their own comments and ideas to the text of the draft law. In the Ministry of Finances, there are working groups, and they work quite intensively, not in all directions, but the most productive working group works on the tax on income. And that group, in that group, the representatives of auditing companies and of Ukraine, professionals from scientific and research institutes, and so they are almost done with taxation on enterprises, and base for taxation will be according to standards of accounting, according to the standards of financial reports, and with corrections of some errors, some difference, and that will happen anyway, because standard of accounting of financial reports for some expenditures, they are they have a dispositive nature, and all the countries in the world they introduce such limitations to calculate some expenditures like amortization and financial expenditures and forming of reserves when they decide on the base origin of taxation. So conceptual, there is a very common, very simple logic. Financial results are defined according to financial reports standards, and they are correlated to some tax differences. And those differences, tax differences, we suggest to keep 3 of them. And also we finished the discussion with the tax service, and we would like to establish criteria for enterprises and volumes, and those which have not big volumes of realization. We should give them the right to decide to define their financial results before taxation and without corrections, without taking into account those differences. So for small enterprises, it is planned to everything will be done on the basis of financial reports. If there is any question, if there will be many questions, I would like to give a floor. We have a question to Oksana Prodan, because she represents a committee in the parliament. She's a deputy head of the committee on tax issues. And what is the mood? And she was working on that. She explained that concept yesterday. What's the mood in the committee? What's the biggest problem? What are advantages? And you can correct me, but I think there is a big, the most painful story is with VAT and how to get out of the shadow and how to stop paying salaries in envelopes. Thank you very much. In the committee and among MPs and among experts in the committee, the same mood and attitude to the concept, like here, who working in the working groups, somebody in the Ministry of Economy, some in the Ministry of Finances, and we found out the situation like this. We have working groups that are working for several months on developing a global reform in the Ministry of Economy. And the Ministry of Economy developed a draft law, and they presented it, and it can be discussed. There are some questions to it, but that means global changes in the tax system, and there are working groups, and they are quite efficiently worked by the Ministry of Finances, and they have experts and people from the ministries and the MPs, and so they develop some other issues which can help to change the existing system, but at the same time, the government, the Cabinet of Ministers, they bring the third variant, and nobody saw it, and nobody knows about it. And both the Parliament and many experts look at that concept without understanding what did we do before. That's number one, the problem. This concept must be the last document about all society, and nobody knows why it was prepared. So it's not correct to bring ready documents for the discussion. There are working groups and people, experts, society, they are ready to work on reforms. And this is one part of the problem. Now about the concept and amendments of reduction of the number of taxes. Everybody supports that idea. And the question is how to reform, how to reduce from 13 to 5, especially those which are reformated, because in 2010, when they prepared the tax code and the government oversaw, that's what they used, that approach they used, and that environmental tax became much more complicated. So the question is, how will we prepare this? What's the goal of the concept? What's the goal of reforms in the tax system? And the example with wages, we can see the burden on wages, and the government has suggested 6 models, and all the 6 models in the concept, there are calculations, there are arguments, choose any model, which is the best, but the goal of this is related to calculations in the concept. So for every model, the most important additional revenues, which are calculated without any new job officially. So the Ministry of Finances and existing government even don't consider an opportunity, a chance that there would be new revenues if we get out of the economy from shadow. Why do we reform then? And why do we demand to do this? Because we wanted to take 5 million as minimum, 5 million of people from shadow economy, for those people to feel themselves like equal in the country. But there is no model which has these calculations. With such a model, 1 million, 2 million, how many will come from the shadow? So the question is, why do we need this reform? We need this for the society.
I understand as far as the Ministry of Finance is concerned, because the revenue part grows, but whether the economy will go out of shadow, I doubt very much. All the conceptual foundations are very well. They are well written. They correspond with the programs of democratic parties when they go to elections, but the practice is rather different. We see some laws, and part of the concept is already in the legislation, but here's the example. We have in the simplification of taxation, we see special accounts on VAT. You know, when the one that I pressed my green button with great distaste, because we agreed to introduce special accounts as of the 1st of January, in response to the promise of the Prime Minister that we will work upon this and devise some mechanisms before the 1st of January. This was actually the condition. However, there is no simplification of taxation that they were talking about, and both drafts were prepared by the same government. Another point is that there's a prepared block of draft laws on the state fiscal service, but the block about the liquidation of the tax police is not about this. It is about the creation of a much stronger monster in the control sphere. So here you have declaration is one and realization is another. And another draft law, 4435A, about the decentralization of the budget, also prepared by the government, but in reality it snatches revenue away from local budgets and increases the number of responsibilities of local authorities. So it is very important that every concept pertains to the results of its implementation. However, at the moment we see declaration of intentions and the reality, the actions of the government that do not correspond to the interests of society or business. You know, what we've seen here is just a drawing with general declarations, and we have 3 draft laws that do not even correspond to their names. Denis Fudashkin is ready to answer. I'll just comment about the decrease in taxes. Not a single working group had doubts about that the number of taxes should be decreased. Yes, there were huge discussions in different directions, and of course there are essential changes in the profit tax, but the majority of the participants in the working group support this approach, and this is what the government suggests. Also, the working groups have put forward some proposals that do not provoke discussion. No discussion about the need to decrease taxes, no discussion about the need to switch to the definition of financial result according to the standards of financial accountability, and to lessen the number of tax indexes that are being used to determine taxes. As far as special accounts are concerned, well, we have a lot of options for the society to discuss. We understand that any decrease in the single social contribution leads to the decrease in the funds of the pension fund. Both options that we have now about the single social contribution leads to the decrease in the revenue of pension fund at the level of 45 to 47 billion hryvnia per year. So there is no way we are going to do like, let's decrease the rate of taxation and then work. According to the existing obligations of the state sector, the deficit is going to be over 5% of GDP, and this is without taking into account the Naftogaz debt. So we will be looking for ways that will make possible such a decrease, but at the same time the state will be fulfilling its obligations as far as pensioners and other categories are concerned. Well, of course, these are the proposals put on the table, but maybe there are some others that could help us balance and provide for the fulfillment of those obligations. That's why we want the society to discuss this issue, and there could be different approaches like progressive taxation of the profit of income, so that we have a resource for sponsoring, and maybe like the MPs suggest, the raising of the pension age, maybe something will be compensated for. Some of those losses will be compensated for at the expense of the cutting of budget expenditure, because of course if we cut the salaries, then the taxes from them are cut, and this reserve can be used as a subsidy for the pension fund, but this is not a very significant sum as far as the losses of the revenue for the pension fund is concerned. But maybe someone has specific proposals at the moment. Let's start with you. Yulia Drogovoz, the Ukrainian Congress of Entrepreneurs. I wanted to ask my question about the first, because when you were talking about the working groups at the Ministry of Finance, I am a member of the group about the profit tax, and we are working on the idea of harmonization of accountability and bringing the accountability to the index of financial result. A priori, this is supported by the business, but everything depends upon how avidly and accurately this idea will be realized. If it is not related in a quality way, then business is going to get a lot of problems. At the moment, we have it in a well-working way. We're working with this, but we wanted to improve it for the business. So we wanted to level all the differences. But one of the main differences is the one that is being proposed to be left in the concept, that the difference according to amortization. We think that we found mechanisms that allow to level it, but we still think about state interests. This is about the assets in enterprises that could help level expenditure for amortization. At the moment, in spite of us having worked out all these options, the Ministry of Finance is looking at another option with quotient use. I must tell you that this is totally unacceptable, and if the Ministry of Finance and other experts do not discuss our suggestions, this concept is going to be absolutely non-effective and will bring about a lot of negative moments for the business. We are against the difference on amortization, otherwise there's no simplification of taxes. The group on agrarian sector, I do not participate there, but I know that they have discussed the ideas different from what are here in the concept. The idea on the taxation of the agrarian sector we saw in the draft law 4309A, and MPs have not supported this idea. They have repulsed this idea because it was not about 10% of taxpayers going to be taxed according to a simplified structure, but many, many more. Even the ideas have changed now. The criteria of the taking into account the square territory of their land. This is not a significant concession to the business, and majority of agricultural enterprises is going to be under the usual scheme of taxation, although now they enjoy the simplified regime now. And the diagram in the concept is not correct. It was necessary to get the information how many taxpayers who are now in the special regime will go to another system, and how many of them will join the general scheme. I think this is not going to be 10%, and whatever is there in the concept does not provide any ground for analysis. What was the expectation of the business? We thought it was going to be the code of economic growth, but this is not. There's not a single norm, not a step about this help to investment or to attract investments, not a single norm that would support a small business. This is the major thing. If you don't object, I would like to provide an opportunity to Mr. Fudashkin to answer. As far as the difference in amortization is concerned, it exists in all the countries of the world. As far as the discussion during the working groups, there are different positions. This is a private thought idea, and most of the experts say that in any case the difference should be there. Otherwise, because of the dispositive standard on amortization, where you independently use the term of the usual amortization and in fact can amortize within 1 year, this limitation exists in all the countries of the world. I want to explain about double accountability. There is no proposition of double accountability because it is suggested that the difference will be corrected by the determined result of financial activity. So I think that this suggestion is supported by the majority of the members of the working group, and that's why the Ministry of Finance supports it. We are not going to go along the way with not establishing the difference on amortization for big enterprises. We cannot support it. About agricultural tax, some statistics. Out of all the agricultural enterprises that use the simplified system of taxation or the single agricultural tax, 90.2% have their annual turnover less than 20 million. So the parameter, the measure, the yardstick suggested by the concept pertains only to 10% of the existing agricultural companies. Out of all the agricultural enterprises working on the special regime of taxation and have land in their use, that is less than 3,000 hectares, which is one of the criteria of selection. Well, this pertains to 96.6%. Only 3.6% have their territory of their agricultural lands more than 3,000 hectares, which is, as we think, not a huge quantity of enterprises. And those are rather big companies that can pay tax on profit within the general system of taxation. These are public data made public by the State Statistics Committee. Everyone can check it on their site. They are here in officials' reports on the site of the State Committee of Statistics about the land in agricultural use.
A question: how many of them are on special regime of VAT, and how many of them are paying specialized agriculture tax? Because there is a difference in numbers. And so which number of taxpayers are you talking about? Those who are on special regime, or special approach. Once again, I clarify, at present, 3.4% of enterprises, they use the land, agricultural land, that is higher than 3,000 hectares. So 3.4% of agriculture companies own or use, they use more than 3,000 hectares. This is not a small business. These are big enterprises, quite powerful, and they can be not under simplified system of taxation, but they can pay according to the general, and they could decide on financial results according to state standards of accounting. The first about agriculture enterprises. I understand that they can, but we are the third in the world as to export of grains. On which place will we be after your novelties? I know that you can. Why do you get into their pocket? This is the first question. I understand you should only that part which they will pay, but they can split into small enterprises. Agriculture enterprises give the biggest number of currency, and agriculture enterprises. What will happen to them because of your novelties? What are the consequences for the economy because of your proposals? That will worsen the situation with agriculture enterprises. And so the question is why? It's not a reform. Then about the proposal about there is a concept. Poor will pay more than the rich. So the burden on the wage is 50% for poor, and for rich it will be 30%. Where's the reform? For poor to pay more? The average burden on the salary will be 42% after your novelties. So the question is, that is the highest taxation for wage in Europe. The question is why? Then you enlarge burden for small business, and the part, a minimal salary up to 41%, and the small business which pays, which is on one tax, they will pay more. Why? What for? So you don't get 40 billion, and so briefly, our proposals. We suggest to reduce it down to 18% and then to have a condition for transitional period of higher salaries. For transition, those whose salary fund is higher, then they can be under a tax of 18%. After that period is over, an enterprise will use that tax. That does not reduce what a pension fund gets. Why don't you consider that variant? And once again, I repeat, and this is a big encouragement to legalize salaries. No, but the reduction. I don't understand why the government doesn't work on the issues of offshore. There are offshore issues, and the government ignores them. That they have to close those holes. And the reduction of expenditures. Why don't they reduce expenditures for prosecution, which is like a bubble became under Yanukovych. Prosecutors said they don't do anything, but they're financed from the budget. As to pension age, these are my proposals. About offshore, close those holes. About a reduction of taxes, expenditures for prosecution, reduce that. You speak. There are a lot of categories who become pensioners when they're 35, 45. Why don't you enlarge the same with tax inspection? Why do they go for pension so early? What's separate? A bookkeeper. To be a bookkeeper, it's more complicated than to be a tax inspector. From the format of roundtable, we can switch to the press conference format. And if you don't mind, I can give the floor further, or do you want to react? Are you ready? I would like to give the floor to... Yes. 17% of pensioners, they have not achieved standard pension age. 55 for women and 60 for men. This is a problem because a big part of the society, they have a special system of pension. They are under a special pension program, and in this case, we have to look for solutions of that issue. As to, I agree with you in this. In that sense, I agree with you. Let's discuss what should be done in order to balance the pension fund, and I share your concern that we tax the salary too much. There are several solutions. That's why we have different options. Let's discuss, and let's stop accusations about legalization. In case a reduction, we have to look at the demographics in the country. For us to come to 18% of taxation, just to reduce and to have a balanced pension fund under this democratic situation. The pension should be on the level of 65. Then people should go to the pension when they are 65, because the population, all the population who are older than 65, in relation to the working population is 24%, and to buy the level of replacement of pension with a salary on the level of 60%, we need, in this case, in that case only the tax will be 18%. About the format, how these accounts were accepted. Several times I asked to include into the group to develop VAT accounts. We were told we are not doing anything, we're just thinking. Then they brought together people, and they gave and they told these are two variants, very bad and not very bad. Choose. We give you a choice, and they chose the not very bad because the very bad would just stop economy. I would like to give the floor to Volodymyr Kotenko. Ilya, by the way, as to the concept with what about those who paid salary openly? Will they pay 41% on average during the transitional period? They have the same conditions like today. We don't complicate the situation. So during the transitional period, they pay as well as they do now. But after the period is over, they will pay 18%. So after the transitional period, some general comments phrases and then something concrete. Look in general. In the country, there is no one payer. There are different businesses, different groups with different rates, and there are businesses that they pay taxes openly, the majority, because the margin is very good, and there are businesses and they pay taxes, and there are some businesses they don't pay taxes at all, and also there is a business which legally don't pay taxes using benefits. To develop a concept or to try to which would satisfy all at the same time, it would be very difficult, in my opinion. And I will outline it. What the government outlined in this concept, that they would like to touch on some issues which can be interesting for different segments of business. Everybody speaks about a too big burden on salary fund. Yes, we had to reduce. Yes, solutions are discussed, and probably there will be a compromise. Oksana told that she hopes that will be the last concept. The country of the concept, our country is the country of concepts. There will be many concepts before, and there will be a lot of shadow until these begin reforms. And in the country, there was no real tax reform. Everything was built despite external changes. The taxes were built on needs, not what he speaks about, how to review the approach to expenditures, and I support him. Until now, nobody did it before. Just because of campaigns, because there were many reasons. Expenditures of the burden also public finances, it's growing every year. What other ways to finance these growing expenditures except taxes in the majority of cases? It doesn't matter how we distribute too much unrealistic burden. Someone will be offended, and keeping benefits and internal offshores, and from the point of view of morality, it's not ethical, because somebody has to pay the full price and full tax, and somebody doesn't participate in financing the social public needs. So the arguments are such benefits are beneficial to someone. So instead of paying taxes, they get something else. They get some benefits, and reviewing of benefits, it's time to do that. And every concept, by the way, for decades, for more than 10 years, and every plan of taxes shows that we have to review and reduce benefits. Now we come to concrete issues. So limitation of benefits, and that's unreversible. Less on payment from salary fund. I agree with that. I agree with that. The representative from the Ministry of Finances that reduction should be agreed with the level of finance, but at the same time, I support Ilya, who says that without a limitation or without cutting expenditures, we will always miss money. We'll always need money. And the next point, only taxation in order with salaries, and not only taxation can take a business from shadow. There could be limitations for currency flows and cash flows, and introduction of methods of control, registrators of operations, financial operations, and even if someone disagrees that it is built locally on the points of payment. But anyways, it will be a problem if it is not there. But without broader methods of control, we will not be able to realize the package of reforms, and to have a high VAT. Without efficient control, we'll lose that money. And finally, responsibility. Sorry, but now taxes are not paid, not because they are very high. For many, they are very high. Taxes Taxes, they don't pay taxes because it's cheaper not to pay. These are several steps we have to take, not only speak about them. And we need the government to be wise, and those who pass laws, they should be wise. They should guess, and based on the experience, and they should be smart how to do it. And limitation of cash payments, and introduction of registrators, high responsibility, and a lower burden on the salary fund, limitation of checks, and the lowest cost about that. These steps, in principle, they can push those who don't pay taxes now, and reduction of benefits, because there are some categories who pay legally, and some people who don't pay taxes quite legally. So introduction of these measures will cause that those who don't pay to social needs, and they will pay, and those who finance social needs, to big extent, maybe it's not nice, but if they have that burden, maybe for some time they will continue do it. Nevertheless, the importance of reduction of expenditures and reduction of budget expenditures, that is, if not now, then it will be tomorrow a problem, or today in the afternoon, and the same without without pension reform. And then we can get real results. And though Denis didn't mention it, but we should be in a hurry. But we should not destroy the system of financing public needs, and which is working.
Thank you, Mr. Volodymyr. I want a brief statement, because I heard my favorite word, responsibility. I understand it's going to be painful. I am always on the side of the business, but you should understand that the time now is such that someone will feel pain. And then, we shall look for reasonable compromise where the state can somehow develop and the business work in more or less normal conditions, and we still can talk about investment attraction. If we find this compromise, those who should feel pain should be corruptioners. This is, of course, true, but are we going to answer questions from the floor? Please ask all the questions into the mic. Let me give the floor to two speakers, and then you. Taras Kozak. I want to apologize first to Mr. Denis, because he is the embodiment of all the authorities here, and it is not just he is to blame for the concept that do not satisfy broad strata of the population, including public and business, but I'd like to point out several positive things about this concept. I'd like to single out three of them. First, the lessening of the number of taxes, really 5 or 7 taxes lesser. So I'd like to say that this is a populist step, because the rest are just joined in. About the profit tax, of course, there are some new things that are positively viewed by business, but we know that the devil is in details, and we know that we pay more for the profit tax now by the tune of to the tune of 23 to 25 billion hryvnia. Why we pay more? Because they are pressurizing the business and make them pay in advance. You can hardly tell by those drawings what's going to be there in the text, and how the tax people will use this in situ. And then the third point is the lessening of the number of punitive bodies that's pressurizing the business from 5 to 1. Yesterday, we talked to the Service of Financial Investigations of Ukraine, which is being set up now. There was a huge discussion where they said that there is a positive thing in lessening the number from 5 to 1, but within the text there's the increase of the pressure and increase of opportunities. There's not a word about the responsibility of taxation people and no mechanism about the control of control over tax people, and the word corruption is used to applies to everyone except this system. It is thought that ideal people will join this service, but somehow those are going to be people who previously worked in the 5 previous bodies. However, they think that they will ideally work. So I tell you that these 3 things, which I single out as positive, they are populist. This is pre-election. Maybe someone is going to run for the MP office. This is not serious. There are just drawings that the public should like. So if we dig deeper, then we see that apart from some populist ideas, there's nothing there. We need a deep, really deep reform, several features. For instance, the number of people who have tax benefits is 20 to 30 million. Only those who are not clever or lazy, those do not have benefits. Everyone has some privileges. When the number of people with benefits is greater than the number of those who have not, this is not healthy. This means that the effective business pays more they have to pay for those who have some tax privileges. The number of pensioners, we know that at the moment the number of pensioners is higher than the number of those who have jobs. So anyone who has a job has to provide for themselves, their family, their parents, and at least one pensioner. And some of those who have jobs are officials and public servants who do not create any added value. Then the pension fund is a pension hole. Why do we call it pension fund, not a pension hole? This is the constant subsidy from the budget to pay for your pensions. So there is no talk about radical reform. You know, shall we make a tax out of it? And there's not a word about contributions to other funds. Maybe it has just vanished somewhere from the text. Maybe shall we do it like in Georgia? There's no pension fund at all, and the budget is responsible for pensions. The solidary system of pension provision does not work in Ukraine now, because even in theory you cannot work when the number of pensioners is more than the number of people who have jobs. The world reacts to the crisis with a lessening of pressure against the business. Is there any interest in the world to come to Ukraine and create new jobs? No. When we compare our financial pressure with France or Italy, good countries where there is a stable court system, brilliant infrastructure, why the new businessman who thinks where to create new jobs or build a new plant, why should they go to Ukraine? Because the tax pressure is like everywhere, but the financial pressure is higher. Then there's war. Of course, no one's going to be here. They will go to Singapore. A software programmist, the IT people, they won't go here. We're doing nothing to create new jobs. We're just squeezing out more and more from the existing jobs. There's no chance for economic growth in this way. So the approach should be totally different. Maybe colleagues know that a huge public organization, New Country, suggested that in order for Ukraine to have growth and to come to the level of at least Poland within 7 to 10 years, we have to decrease the financial pressure to the 18% of GDP. Of course, this will not allow us to pay pensions and help for disabled, but if we do not do this, we will be in the tail of European countries. At the moment, only Moldova lags behind us, and even Albania is in front of us, ahead of us. We are going to be in the end of the Doing Business Index in Europe. The word goes to Olga Bogdanova, who is the member of the Chamber of Tax Consultants. Every taxation reform suggests the reform of the system, the relations between employer, employee, and the state, where you should work for the interests of all the parts. 1621 law about the electronic administration of business. At the moment, it is actually the murder of business. We are not against electronic administration of VAT, but we are talking now about our opposition to the system in the way it is. At the moment, it suggests that we make a special account for the provision of the VAT obligations. This could be a tax loan or money. So the painful points here are the law does not provide for transfer points, transition points. So if from the 1st of January the system has to work, and theoretically you have the right for compensation, but it does not take into account what you have declared in December. Then about personal accounts, you can use this money in the future, but it comes to zero from the 1st of January. There's no transfer of this money for the future. So all the money that the business has now as the budget compensation, there won't be. The state fiscal system says that we will check again and again, but we have been checked already, and the amounts of money there is millions and maybe billions. Another point, on the 1st of January we come to our jobs. I am a businessman and want to sell something, and on the 1st of January not a single supplier will have money. So I will have to take money somewhere to put into my account in order to register. There's no point mechanism of taking money back from this VAT account. So this money goes either to the budget or to the special agricultural account. Automated compensation. Please hear me. From the 1st of January, there are two ways. First, you have a negative balance, and we say this goes only to the budget. You will never get compensation. But then there's a budgetary compensation only for those companies that correspond to the criteria of automated compensation. And the residue cost of assets has to be 12 times bigger than the sum that's going to be compensated. And again, the amount of investment during the last year, which amounts to at least 3 million hryvnia. There is no semi-automatic system. This is a colossal freezing of money. I have this list is rather big. I just want to emphasize that the law in general freezes not just 1/5 of the turnover, but all the negative balances of overpayment that the business will have by the 1st of January. There's no way to get your money back. My clients, when we hold mini seminars, they are just throwing those things into my face and say, go away with your Ukraine.
Denis is ready to answer. I agree that we freeze 1/5. No, I disagree that we freeze 1/5 of money of the company with this electronic system of administration. Such position was suggested in other models from the state tax office, financial office, fiscal office, but it was not supported by the government. And the system we have is not the system of VAT accounts in a classical sense, like we had before. This is, in effect, the system of guarantees, ensuring that if an enterprise brings taxes receipt, that's the sum of money that's the sum of money. The biggest problem in administration with VAT is that enterprises, companies issue such documents, tax documents, and they allow to reduce taxes for other companies, and they disappear or etc. They disappear. As to 1/5, there is no 1/5 here. In fact, money that should be paid to enterprises as a result of their declarations, and not more than that. As to transitional regulations, I can tell you that we'll refuse calculation of loans. We didn't mention that in the draft law. If there is a doubt how to interpret the reduction of in the formula, how to calculate taxes which were registered in the system by the 1st of January, then additionally we can clarify that issue together with the Committee on Tax Policy according to the law. If there is a difference in interpretation of these terms, and that tax loan which we'll have by the 1st of January, and according to registered documents, tax documents, will be calculated when we define taxes for the future. Tell me, please, how and what statistics do you have? What's the sum of budget compensation do you have on accounts of payers, and what sums do we meet, and how they will be transformed to VAT accounts since the 1st of January? Well, thank you for that, because we're not trying to press you. We would like to attract your attention to very important issues, and we discussed that in the fiscal service. Please give your comments, and make your comments about half automatic reimbursement of VAT at present, because the fiscal service stopped manual regulation, and who can claim VAT. It has changed. The structure has changed of applications. If on January 1st, 2014, we had 10% of claimants' statements to return to the accounts, and then for future payments, account, we have 14.6 billion hryvnia. The rest from not compensated part. How will it look like on January 1st, 2015 for VAT accounts? There is a formula of a necessary sum. Let me everything what the government could prepare, they did. We have that. There is an agreement that by the 1st of January, the sooner the better, we'll do it through the parliament, and we prepare changes for that to happen. Don't wait for the Minister of Finance to do that on tax inspection. Just suggest how that should be. We'll get together in the committee, and we'll develop that procedure, which we should must have for that formula to be in the law. I will. As to VAT accounts, and there is no need to have the whole sum according to the volumes of realization on that VAT account. In the formula, it describes which sum should be there to have a chance to register your tax document. And if the sum of higher of taxes then higher, then for the difference, I will make it simple. If a company received tax loan for 1 million, which is registered in the system of a tax inspection, tax service, and they will like to issue documents for 1.2 million. And there will be a tax compensation for 1.2 million. And then they should declare on the difference. If volume of additional value less, then it will be smaller. If the sums are the same, if they fit, and there is no need to declare that sum. Thank you very much. We heard the most important a very small comment. Using this chance, let's have a working meeting for the whole day, representatives from different interest groups, and we prepared so many concepts in different groups and so many amendments that it's just funny. Sorry for being so emotional. Oleksandra Tomashevska, partner of Kyiv Center to support business development. I am a tax consultant, and the main part, the mostly is I consult the business how to pay taxes minimally. That's why my opinion on this, because business it's like water through stone. We will find the ways. First, that's the first point. Look. I looked with the eyes of a businessman on the concept of reforms. If an owner of business doesn't understand the concept of the reform from the first page, then there is no reform. This to be very brief. So the scale of VAT and they don't enterprise. They don't take revenue from companies because it costs money. We have 18%. That's if I want to take it to get it from the bank, and because I earn that money. If I am an owner, if I am an investor, I pay 5% of NDPL plus 5. It's 23. It's a hidden taxes. An owner is a legal entity. I pay tax and that is for revenue and for repatriation, and so the profit will be more expensive. And why Poland? We had partners from Poland. They were surprised, and if I pay in Poland 19% of revenue tax, I go and take it. It's the same. One-level taxation system. Why Ukraine shouldn't make such a step? That's the first question. Secondly, getting cash. We observe a very interesting thing. Money, the enterprises get cash to finance bulletproof jackets, helmets. They get cash to finance the army with their own means, so volunteers, etc. We have statistics, and I monitor statistics on the site of tax office. For the previous period, when we had not honest. There was 280 billion hryvnia. That was the shadow turnover. That's your salary in envelopes. So we know the volumes are paid out in cash. Not all the salaries, some go for bribes. The shadow turnover potential, that's a potential number from which a tax can be paid. We have the same. If I know the scheme how to cash, even from VAT account, I can draw you a picture how to do it. Those who have, they can. So that will cost also money. So for me, for example, will consult on VAT accounts. But in my opinion, shadow schemes, they will get alive. So there will be more offers, and because yes, it's an opportunity to think, and there will be a lot of mediation change. So Ukraine is making an interesting step. We as a consultants, we observe it, but business is not clear. They think it's a joke. Maybe in January they turn back. Two more points, and cash register discipline 5. Sanctions is not paying them, and you just pay. And you deal with your cash, and nobody will pay in that. I called the main accounts, and with the cash registered, everybody's smiling, and they say no, nothing has changed. Currency control. Why not to simplify it? Why not to help? We have lots of documents to deal with. Why not to make life easier? Soviet forms for my. That's how you could help a business, in our opinion. We have a very short time, and I would like to give a chance for journalists to ask questions, and I promised that to Oleksandra. I have a question to Mr. Fudashkin. I remember you since the time when you were in the Ministry of Finances, and in 2000. That was the first time we took an interview for our magazine. So a simple question: where on the side of the pension fund, where could we find auditor's report? Very unexpected question. I will answer. There is no report. There is one page, 2,000. And this is how many they received from the budget, and what they have, and how many, and etc. It says and etc. So they mentioned sums 3 million they spent for some specific pensions, but it doesn't say, for example, how much they spent for administration and many other things. I would like to remind that from the state budget, they pay 1/3 of what pension fund pays to pensioners and spends for itself. I don't understand why we need that. So what's your question? Where do money disappear in the pension fund? That's the first question. The second question is about ESV and tax for physical entities, and how from local budgets you get money and DFL, and how do you give them to the pension fund? And because of that, call it the way you want. Publish an agreed concept of reform of ESV, and take into account how you wanted to take it from shadow. And look how they did it in Russia when they introduced a different taxation for physical entities, and they or do it or tell us when you are going to do that. And the last, it's about responsibility of cash registers, etc. To Mr. Kotenko, I remember you for many years since the time of business. Look, invent something for those people who, because of our war in the East, they lost their business and jobs. Give them a chance. At the start, everybody's has abuses, blames Kuchma, but he saved the country, the economy once. If some don't put those burdens on them. And the questions are clear. Thank you.
I'll try to answer about the pension fund. Well, really, this is a very hard situation, but the parliament has supported the government's proposal that in the future the cabinet of ministers is responsible for approving the budget, taking into account the fact that a significant part of the financial participation in the pension fund is played by the state and all taxpayers. The general amount of financing is about 80 billion additionally from the state budget for the expenditure of pension fund. Part of it is the deficit of the general pension system, and there's another sum which is the gap that is created because of additional pension systems like early retirement, privileged pension, the higher sum of replacement. The government has approved. The government was supported by the parliament. As far as the budget of the pension fund is concerned, to be approved by the government and be published on the site of the cabinet of ministers. So I hope that this process will become more transparent. About I ask you not to deceive people as far as the taking money out is concerned. We're talking about the aggregate income, and part of it goes for the state budget, part of it goes for local budgets, and this issue is being solved by the general aggregate balance of public finance. This is central budget, local budget, and some funds. The order of redistribution is being regulated by the tax code. There's a lot of additional transfers from the state budget to local budgets, and if the income at the expense of the income tax for individuals is rising, then of course there's the need to raise the expenditure from the state budget. So there's no talk about exemption. Oksana, Prodan. Volodymyr, Kotenko. Very briefly, of course we can leave everyone alone, and they are still, even now they are left alone, those who pay simplified system, but they are saving not just themselves. You can get to know how much additional income profit is made because of different schemes. We cannot say that there's no tax avoidance. This would be an exaggeration. And the mechanisms of control that you mentioned, they can coexist with what Oleksandra mentioned, the lessening of the archaic means of control and responsibility, and the introduction of contemporary means of electronic checking machines. And by the way, from the 1st of January, every receipt will be stored on the servers of state bodies. They will allow to understand that you could be checked any moment. Total lack of control leads to total lack of responsibility, and of course the tax avoidance. There's no cashiers, cash machines. This is your interpretation. What do you mean by we want? We have 5 minutes left, well, maximum 7. Yes, please. Yes, of course, they would like to introduce cash machine, receipt machines, and this is taking place. But I want to tell you, in principle, what Alexander asked, whether the smallest can be freed. Yes, of course, but when we talk about the introduction of cashier's machines, the business said, yeah, this is not a question, but please try allow us to avoid corruption. There's a draft law which is there, and it simplifies and decriminalizes those operations, but the Cabinet of Ministers or other players are not interested in adopting this draft law. When we talk about ISV being a tax now, and it would be right to say that there's a minimal social pension guaranteed by the budget, but the rest is about the saving system. They always like to quote Constitution, and they say you should change Constitution. And then, of course, when we say that we can save on budget expenditure, and then, we have enormous pension obligations according to different laws. They say, go to the Constitution and see that we cannot do anything in this sphere. However, when the Cabinet of Ministers initiated the cancellation of salaries for officials for 2 months, this is contrary to the Constitution. They didn't look at the Constitution then. If there is a task and political will and the desire to legalize the existing tax for salary, then it will be going another thing. There is such an opportunity. You quoted Russia. They have first decreased the tax, but then they reinstated it because there is a corruption system there. But I can quote Georgia here, when they decreased the fiscal load for individuals by 40%, and because of this, over several years, they have raised the income from taxes on individuals twofold. These are concrete figures, and now in Georgia, the aggregate load is 20%. In the concept that we suggest is something like 58%. Let's have the single social contribution, and the maximum is 40%. There's no ground to talk about the concept that will lead to taking the economy out of shadow. And will it help the business? We see that real and actual draft laws are working against, after they are adopted, they work against the business. I think that all the steps leading to legalization should be made through economy. The business should not look for means mentioned by Alexandra. All these ways that business finds to avoid some bans on the part of authorities, they all affect the cost of produce and, in the end, every customer in Ukraine. Volodymyr Mykhaylenko, the Association of Tax Consultants of Chamber of Commerce. I agree, and I emphasize once more that we were expecting to see a system that will be able to charge our economy for going out of the shadow, because the government is trying to find where to take money, and it can be solved by taking money out of shadow, by increasing the GDP, but you should create the economy attractive for investments in this case, and also by decreasing the expenditure. If they do not if they are not brave enough to go for anything of those means, then the deficit is going to stay there. We have to be braver. We have not to fear unpopular decisions or solutions, and those solutions that create the so-called threat for the government. We have a huge amplitude of tax load now when we can pay up to 50% out of our salary, but some people can only pay 5%, even more than 50%. I mean, the aggregate both from employer and employee. When you have the model of tax planning with the help of special institutions and offshore zones that may lead to zero tax load, this is a gambling situation when even tax police or inspectors cannot understand and diffuse this. And they try to do this by illegal methods. So your summary, please. The summary is you should not be afraid to cut the taxes or cut the privileges and make the system level. As far as the profit tax is concerned, only 3 tax differences were declared, and such things as payments to offshore zones and unreturnable financial help. Don't we see any difference here? I think there will be differences, and a good proposal was not voiced here. In order to harmonize accountability, shall we go to the Estonian model of taxation? You don't hear me, and people don't hear us because they are facing the next briefing. I recommend that you talk to each other because we got a lot of ideas and concepts. We shall have to do something in this. And of course, we should write 2 concepts. Thank you, everybody. Very strict timing in the media reform answer.